Zach, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I want to talk about a bunch of different city policies and aspects of Sioux Falls, but I'd like to start by just getting to know you a little bit better. Tell me why you decided to run for city council.
Sure. I guess I've been involved in city politics or civic decisions for a while now. My background, at least started mostly in the arts. I have a degree in art education and I'm a practicing artist. My original forays into city stuff was through the arts, through public art and things like that. I was on the city's Visual Arts Commission for 6 years. From that, my interest in things like placemaking or redesigning streetscapes, make them safer for pedestrians and for motorists at the same time, started to widen my scope of the things that I was involved with. It was no longer just making pretty pictures on the wall. It was also about making pretty lines on the streets so people could cross streets, be safe, slow down speeding cars, that sort of stuff. And so since then, I've been heavily involved in my neighborhood association. I was on the Historic Preservation Board. And I'm really passionate about Sioux Falls. I think it's a great city with like a lot of opportunity, but like a lot of potential. I think to be something that's really unique and a place that's not only great to raise your family in, but also a great place, an interesting place to visit. And so a lot of the work that I do is aimed at just creating a better community, creating a better environment for Sioux Falls. And so I think that if I were on city council, I'd have greater opportunities to do some of those things, try to push forward some bigger ideas that I've been passionate about over the past almost 15 years now. That's why I'm running. I ran in 2018 for this same seat, for the Central District. Came up a little bit short, 149 votes, who's counting? So I'm excited to run again and just love Sioux Falls, passionate about the work.
Great, fantastic. I want to start with the most controversial question, just to get that out of the way. If you could eat at only one Sioux Falls restaurant for the rest of the year.
For the rest of the year?
What would that be?
My immediate thought, and this could change day to day, my immediate thought was Phnom Penh.
Ooh.
I love Phnom Penh. They're just
really
right up the hill
pick.
here on
Pick.
Minnesota. Yep. We had our what are you called? The pre-wedding dinner we had at Phnom Penh.
Incredible.
We love it there so much. So I'll go with Phnom Penh.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to get takeout for dinner. Let's get into some policy stuff. One of the questions that a lot of readers of Sioux Falls Simplified came up with was just, related to affordable housing and homelessness. So I've kind of a two-parter, but I'll just ask the first part of it to start. What is your philosophy when it comes to addressing homelessness in our community? And maybe what would you do differently, if anything, than what's currently being done?
One of the biggest, when you research this topic, the thing that is the most successful, according to all the data, all the studies you've seen, is a housing first policy. Housing first just means the biggest priority to help lift people up out of poverty, out of homelessness, is to give them a home. Mm-hmm. And then you are no longer homeless, right? It's hard to get things like a job, a steady job, to have a steady schedule, when you don't have a home base, a place to kind of operate out of. It's also very hard to get off things like drugs and alcohol when you don't have a place to sleep at night.
Yeah.
And so by giving people a home, a place that they can rely on, a place where they can feel safe, those other problems become much easier to tackle.
Yeah.
And we don't have a housing first policy here. There are plenty of cities in the United States and abroad that have shown a steep reduction in homelessness. And so to me, there's one answer.
Yeah.
And to kind of ignore that and maybe hope that there's a different way, or a way in which, I think one of the biggest things right now is with this administration is they're very focused on being alcohol and drug free before you're able to use a lot of these amenities, and even things like stay the night at certain facilities. And frankly, you can have those beliefs or think that people should do that first, but unless you want to see results, that there's only one way to do it.
Yeah.
And so finding more places where we can build affordable housing, especially housing that is not on like the outer edge of the city, is a big part of that. And maybe this flows into your second question.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, in addition to obviously the unhoused population, there's also just an increasing number of people in Sioux Falls, and it's getting more and more expensive to buy like what we would call like a starter home. And, you've got a lot of people looking for affordable housing or accessible housing or whatever you want to call it. What role do you think the city should play in making some of those types of housing available?
Yeah, okay.
Or
so
attracting them, or whatever that means.
There's
to
a
you.
bunch of things there.
Yeah.
I think one, yes, and what I touched on is like when we do build these housing units, when we build these larger apartment complexes to try to, get that number of needed housing units down, we need to be looking at infill development, so filling in the blank spaces that we already have instead of, starting to pave over a new cornfield on the edge of town. Frankly, just because, we don't have a public transportation system that's connecting to those edges of town. When you build on the edge, you're disconnected from things like grocery stores or gas stations or schools or what have you. So focusing on filling in our gaps with more housing is one step of that. The other step is allowing more types of housing to exist, what's called missing middle housing.
Yeah.
So, we have plenty of single-family homes in Sioux Falls, and we have plenty of apartments, right? But what we don't have a lot of are duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. You could also, in that equation, throw in ADUs, accessory dwelling units, or granny flats.
Yep.
We do allow those things, granny flats, having like an extra apartment on your parcel. But there are, I think, some parts of that ordinance that make it difficult. I think there's like a parking minimum that you need to have for that, and some of these kind of regulation things that are maybe getting in the way of us building more.
Yeah.
I could throw it. If we talk about parking minimums, we have a lot of big parking lots in Sioux Falls that sit empty a lot of the time, and when I drive past those, all I can do is think of like why aren't there more apartments on the Empire Mall's lot? I can't think of a better place or for a bunch more people to live than near all that commerce, near all the interstates, those sort of places. But instead, we're out in Harrisburg. So there's one part of that. The other part that I think maybe could be a big help is one, having more incentives to build missing middle. And one of those, not necessarily incentives, but one of those things the city could do to kind of help alleviate those problems or that process of getting something built is by having pre-approved plans. So these are like designs for missing middle housing or types of housing that a developer can pick from. The city's already looked through it and knows that it's okay, so you can speed through that process a lot faster. So that would be all those things are things that I would look to explore if I was elected.
Let's talk a little bit about public safety. The police department's grown significantly under Mayor Paul Tenhaken, both in terms of officers and budget. I mean, the city's grown as well. Crime rate has stayed relatively flat. All that into consideration, how would you approach balancing public safety needs in the community with the budget realities the city's facing? And there's only so many resources.
Yeah, I mean, I think that answer is the same as, how do I balance that with traffic? How do I balance that with nonprofits? I think it's just having a good grasp of what our needs truly are and what sort of return on investment we're seeing in that. I won't claim to have infinite knowledge on what the police department should be spending or what our budget should be on that. Certainly, at least not yet. Because I'll always have an opinion on something. But I do like to be more informed than I am. So yeah, I think just having honest conversations with folks, asking questions, and pushing back when needed, and truly understanding those things, I think, is a big part of it. I like Officer Toom a lot. Sergeant Toom. I knew him back when he was officer.
Police chief now.
That's right. That's it. Whatever his title may be, I've known him for a little while now, and I've been impressed with his leadership.
Yeah.
So I think we're in good hands there. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Another public safety question that's come up from a number of readers. Do you support collaboration between the Sioux Falls Police Department and federal immigration officials?
I mean, look, collaboration is always good, right? For the most part. That's a tricky one, especially with the current environment. I think there are ways to collaborate or at least coexist in a peaceful way. I think it really depends on what that project or effort is.
Yeah.
Before I give a blanket stamp of approval, certainly with a lot of things going on in regards to ICE and other sort of events like that, I think you do have to take pause and really assess what's being done and how it's being done, and
sure,
looking at the issues that other places have faced. Yeah.
Fair enough. This one will hit close to home for you. Let's talk about the arts. Cities in the process of developing an arts and culture plan. Part of that research, they found that the majority of Sioux Falls residents would be in favor of supporting public money for the arts. How would you approach decisions about funding public art projects, and what that process might look like for you?
Yeah, so this is very near and dear. When I was on the Visual Arts Commission, it's been a little while since I was on there now. I think I joined in 2013 or 14.
Okay.
And I had joined because I started to join because there was a big kind of story about the mosaic wall, the community youth mosaic wall.
Okay,
At that time, they were trying to develop that little parcel of land that's over by it, and there were comments about maybe the mural just has to go down or go away, and so that was really my first foray into like public engagement like that, because I obviously felt we should not just be throwing away such a great piece of public art.
And
yes,
that perspective went out, by the way.
It did.
Still there
it
today.
did win out. That was a nice early win that probably got me hooked on this sort of thing.
Yeah, I can appreciate that.
You can blame that. I would say our city has not always made the greatest choices when it comes to public art or supporting of the arts. There are certainly wins, and there are certainly great stories too. I think we have, room for improvement on a lot of these things. One of the biggest is funding. Right now the city, I don't know what their arts budget is, but it's mostly just to pay for a company that comes out and does cleanup and restoration of the city-owned artwork, statues, for the most part. Obviously making sure that that line item is funded properly. But there are plenty of other places where if we want to see more public art, which I would assume everybody does.
Sure.
There's probably people out there like, that's enough. No more, please. If we want to see more public art, the city can have a heavier hand in the creation of that. Excuse me. Heavier hand in the creation of that. And the way that other cities do that primarily is having a certain allotted percentage of funds, usually from like public work funds. So if there's a $2 million public works project, there's a certain percentage of that project that has to be used either to integrate art into that project itself. So an example would be the 26th Street Bridge over the railroad. When they designed that, they set aside a certain amount of money, and they included concrete pavers that had a design on them. It might be for a statue, but another thing you can do is you can go like, okay, we can't really make art out of this sewer line project.
Right.
But that percentage of that project, whatever that percentage was, goes into a pot that is then used for things like that. So the city either commissioning or purchasing artworks, finding more ways to do that. Right now that percentage in the budget is very, very small. And I would say very small compared to cities our size And if we want to tout ourselves as a cultural and artistic and beautiful sort of community, which we do,
Yeah.
right? If you look at our tourism ads and things like that, we are pushing and talking about those things.
Totally.
Then, we need to put our money where our mouth is and continue to fund those things. I would say overall, in the last 5 years, the city's trajectory has gone out as far as supporting the arts. And hiring Maren Engel, what is her title? She's
Arts
the
coordinator,
arts
I
coordinator,
think. Yeah.
Was a big part of that. And when I was on the VAC, we were doing some conversations and figuring out some of the next steps we needed to do as a city. And one of the things we thought we're spending a lot of time on is figuring out that percentage for funding component. But the other big part of that we realized is we can't have that until we have someone whose job it is at the city to take care of arts and culture things.
Yeah.
And we have that now, which is nice because yes, that was a position that exists in a lot of places that we didn't, and maybe we should have.
Yeah.
And now we do, and I think Maren's been doing a really great job. I think there's 3 murals in progress right now.
Yeah, I know for sure the Levitt.
The Levitt's got their big one. I know the Pavilion was working on something.
That's right. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of positive movement in that space. So that's made me very happy to see.
That's great. Another topic I want to touch on is sustainability. The city has a sustainability plan. It's not something the council's ever taken action on, but there is, it's on a shelf somewhere. What would your approach be to protecting natural resources? And specifically, how does that factor into future decisions about development or zoning or those kind of, marrying all that together?
Yeah, well, okay, there's plenty there. I mean, yes, we do have a sustainability plan that was worked on by a lot of folks in the community. Unfortunately, a lot of their work was ignored and taken out before the city approved it, which I think was bad, to say the least, I guess. I think it's important that we listen to experts in these fields.
Sure.
Instead of ignoring those things. And I think there were probably a lot of suggestions in that community created sustainability plan, or at least the original draft that they submitted, that we should be doing. There's plenty of small projects that I think are obvious things, things like cutting down on the amount that we mow in the city, the amount of turf grass we have, think of all the city-owned property that just has turf grass on it, when we should maybe be making the effort to have those be natural native prairie grasses where we could absorb rainwater, which obviously is a big issue for us. It's big storms and things like that. We need to be able to absorb water. And throw in street trees there too is a big thing that I am passionate about. After the ice storm and after the what's it called? Ash borer. Thank you.
Yeah.
After the ash borer, the amount of trees that we must be down from, 2012 to now is, I don't know, thousands and thousands.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know how many of them are being replanted. I know there's some small amount that the city was doing, but there's a half a dozen things as far as development. When we start talking about building on the edge of town, that sprawl component. Infill is so much better for the community. Having permeable surfaces instead of big blacktop parking lots obviously is good for the sustainability and health of the city. So there are a lot of things, especially when it comes to the built environment, that touch on that sustainability aspect for me that I'm passionate about and want to see what we can do, what policies we can change and update. It goes as nerdy as going to we have engineering design standards, and looking into those and going, okay, well, instead of making our streets all 11 feet wide, we could make them 10 feet wide. And on a 4-lane road, that's 4 feet of asphalt. And for how long? You end up with hundreds and hundreds of square feet of asphalt that you no longer have to pave. That can absorb rainwater. And you could do that sort of project on most of the streets in Sioux Falls. So There are a lot of things like that I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
Were there other parts of that question
Well,
that I missed?
I want to ask specifically because something that's come up a number of times in the data center discussion is concerns about water usage, electricity usage, what that what impact that has on the community. What are your thoughts on kind of balancing that the obviously emerging technologies piece of it with the preserving the limited natural resources we have here?
Yeah, water's a big one, and it's one that I don't hear enough people talking about from the things that I've read and how I understand it. Our water comes from the Oglala Sioux aquifer. It's a big amount of water underneath our land. There's aquifers all over the United States. Google all this stuff. You watch a video on aquifers like I did. We can measure that it's a finite amount and we are consuming more and more of it, and it won't be there forever. There are people in like California and Nevada that have to tunnel aquifer because they're out of water. And so, that's a huge conversation, especially with these data centers that and AI things where we know we're consuming way more water than we ever have before. And so, there's a certain feeling of like inevitability about a lot of these data centers being built. So many fights you can have, and at the same time, you also want to be like, we don't want to fall behind technologically or whatever that might be. But the benefits, at least directly from a single data center or a single large water use thing like that, you may not feel yourself in the same way you may not even notice the negative benefits. But it's a really hard line to walk, I think. I do think too often that the sustainability and the ecological impacts of things are like 8th on the list for a lot of leaders. And so that is something I'm passionate about, very passionate about our river, trying to clean that and make that an ecosystem again. I think there's plenty the city can do there to do their part to help clean the river and even advocate outside of its borders to do that. There's plenty of things like that. I'm very earth conscious, I would say.
Fair. I want to switch gears a little bit, talk about families, childcare. What role, if any, talk about another plan the city helped, fund and get solutions for. But what role do you think the city should play in addressing the ongoing childcare crisis, if any?
I don't know. I think there's ways that they can assist with it. I know a lot of it might have to come from more of a state level, or at least where there are larger cities than us, I know, that provide some form of funding because they see the benefit in that. I don't know how common it is in smaller cities. That's something I would need to do research on.
Sure.
I think, and that's not to say I don't think that there probably is a big benefit. I don't know what that number is to fund pre-K education, let's say.
Sure.
At a city level. But from everything I've ever read, those are benefits you reap.
Sure. Sure.
That even if you don't have kids who are going, you still benefit because the people around you are smarter, more well-adjusted, know what's going on. So you do benefit from those things. It would just, it would just come down to how much money, what sort of program. I think, like I said, I think it's probably something that is worth looking into at this point, because I think that the affordability of both daycare, pre-K, that sort of thing has become such a big issue for so many people. And if we want to continue to attract, specifically like young people, young parents and things like that, a great way to do it is to be able to have, say, like it's affordable to send your kids to daycare or to pre-K. So, you can look at it as absolutely an economic and growth tool, is to fund those sort of things. So I think that's definitely something that needs to be spoken about more. But it's expensive, and there's I teach at 3 schools. I have a daughter at a 4th school, and I see what the after school programs are like, and yeah, I mean, there's absolutely a need for it, and I think specifically this next administration, it might become undeniable not to have to say or do something, because currently it's been just like a for the most
kind
part,
of a non-starter on a lot of
right?
in a lot of fronts.
Yeah. So
let's talk a little bit about kind of envisioning for the future. We've got Smithfield moving out of downtown. What's your vision for redeveloping that space, and how would you kind of approach that decision-making process of like, how do we determine what this, basically second downtown might look like?
Yeah. I mean, that's the big fun question right now, right?
Yeah.
I think, I will say a decade, maybe 15 years ago, there was so much less land in downtown. That was before we sold the railroad parcels, which when that happened was massive. Huge news. Those still have not been filled up.
Correct.
We then have, then the Sioux Steel district, that whole area. Then, Tropatu is part of that railroad deal. Then we have the Riverline District land. And so we've had like unprecedented huge chunks almost every couple of years announced. And now we have one that's probably bigger than all three of those combined.
Yeah.
We're sitting at like what I would call a scary amount of empty land where, we only have so many dollars. We only have so many developers. We only have so much construction companies to sort of develop these. And now we suddenly have a ton of options where we didn't before. And so I think knowing that there's like a lot of thought that needs to be put into, what from at least the city's point of view, which of these parcels is priority for us, which and that needs to be, which has the best return on investment, which one of these activates an area more. I think being smart and thoughtful about what parts of those they need to maybe prioritize and kind of get moving is the first question. But if we're just talking about just Smithfield, that large site, the obvious thing is to say we need community support, we need community input, we need to have listening sessions all over the place, both at Smithfield with their employees, at Laura B. Anderson with Whittier neighborhood, go up the hill on Cliff there, find those and go to these people and go to these places. There's lots of churches around there too, and I think having ways for them, one, to give input on what they'd like to see or what their needs are is important. And I think it needs to definitely be something where, yes, there's public input and outside thoughts that are actually valued and put forward. A lot of times projects that happen will do those things. They'll have those meetings. They may not always be at the best times or the most available to everybody, et cetera, or they may only have one. But even sometimes when they have that one, they're not going to do any of the stuff that you brought up or asked because they already made the plan. They've got the thing. They're mostly kind of going through the motions here. And unless someone points out something egregious or there's like truly one unified angry part, it's going to kind of just go forward. And so, ensuring that there are honest conversations that happen and data collection in a way that you can actually generate things from, I think is important. But I think there also needs to be, as that land develops, we need to have a sort of plan for how the city wants to use it. I think that a lot of the new additions to downtown have been semi-successful, I would say. but I think that they are not always built in a way that is going to kind of, because ideally, in my mind, you would want a place that replicates the feeling of being on Phillips Avenue.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's most people's favorite place
Sure.
downtown visually, the way it feels. Obviously, there are cool places to visit, but if we're talking about going to restaurants, sitting out on a patio, strolling along, we're talking about Phillips Avenue. But I think a lot of the places that have been built new still feel like they're designed a little bit more for the car, that it is not really, as you're walking along some of those shops or to enter one of the what are they, hotels. I feel like I'm more at maybe like an office park or like a new. And if we want something that is special, I think that we need to be looking at what are the design patterns of Phillips Avenue that we need to replicate in order to create this sort of atmosphere. So often when the city has parcels, if you look at like a parcel map of the city,
sure.
If you look at Phillips Avenue, they're tiny little rectangles all stacked because that's how they built back then, right?
Yep.
But now, if you look at like the 8th and Railroad land or Trapa, they've built 2 massive buildings that will take up.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get that cozier, more active street environment when you do it that style. And I think this is such a big parcel of land that there is room to do some of those for some of the big things you need. But if we want something that's unique, we need to look at building smaller parcels. Because not only that, like when you sell smaller parcels, smaller developers can't afford to
be a part of it.
You know, but if you make them too big, there's only a handful that can do it. And so if we want to have an architectural variety, a use variety, I think by making things smaller, more affordable, you're going to create something that's a lot more unique. I don't know. I could talk about Smithfield for a while. I think there needs to be a grocery store there. I think that would be important, and obviously housing and all that stuff, and acknowledging the riverfront as well. So, it's a big opportunity, but I think we need to take it slow and be thoughtful. Don't expect everything to be built by the end of 2030.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I want to pivot a little bit. There's some sense among my readers and just people in the community that the city council doesn't listen to its constituents. Do you agree with that sentiment, and how do you plan to seek feedback from the people you represent?
I think there are councilors who definitely listen to the constituents. I think that you might not always agree with the people you're hearing from. There certainly is, this idea of a vocal minority.
Sure.
And that can sometimes be true. But I think what's important that I think more councilors need to do if they don't want to be perceived as someone who doesn't listen to the constituents, that they need to very carefully explain their reasonings behind certain things. If there is a issue that one side is bringing up, you need to respond to that specific issue.
Yep.
Everyone's saying, "Oh, it's this." You have to go, "Okay, about that. Here's my thing. Why?" And it's hard to have that conversation with everybody, right?
Right.
When the closest way to do that would be a Facebook post, unfortunately, and I think especially during the data center thing, that's where people I think felt the least represented, right? Because the overall, I would say, feeling on the street and at the council was no.
Yeah.
That we don't want this. And I think they had reasons for it, and some of those, on some level, I understand why. I think in that specific one, they were almost kind of, because what they were voting on was a rezone.
Right.
And the rezone checked all the correct boxes legally for a rezone, if this was for a data center or for a new strip mall. So I think a lot of them believe that, therefore, they had to say yes, or because it was this. But, I think there's a difference. There can be a difference in your interpretation of your role in that scenario. I think that it was unfortunate that there was no vote. I don't know. I think it's very important to have a open and honest dialogue with the people you're representing, and I think that can be taxing mentally and time-wise too. I think for the counselors, and so some of them may not be as good at that. I'm not sure. I've had success with certain counselors that are on the council now and prior, where I've always felt very heard and at the very least directly informed. But I think just having that conversation, because there might be a time where I have an opinion on a vote and I hear from 4 people who are like, I think no to this.
Yeah.
But as I'm either conversing with them or stating my own things, if I still land on what I think is right, I mean,
sure.
That's the hope is that the people that are electing you can trust your judgment enough and know that even if you maybe disagree on some item, that overall that you're representing what they want to see and doing what they're hoping for. Yeah. It can be tricky.
Yeah. Zach, I want to thank you for kind of riding this roller coaster of topics with me.
Yeah.
Is there any other topic or policy in your platform that you want to let voters know about, or any other thoughts that kind of rise to the surface?
I talked about a few of them during our talk, but I'm obviously someone who's very focused on the built environment, the way that we design and build our city. I think it affects our daily lives and the outcomes of our lives and the successes of our lives in a very, very direct way.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see the city become a place that is more pedestrian friendly. And when we make things more pedestrian friendly, we make things safer for people in automobiles too. When we design places that are built for people instead of moving people through a space, we all succeed. I mean, we talked about Phillips Avenue earlier. I mean, there's a reason that's the place we take photos of. That's the place where when we walk down, we're excited. We feel that energy. And it's because that is such a pedestrian, people-focused space. And there, I think, is room in especially our core neighborhoods where we need to be the ones who are fighting to make this pedestrian again, because the Central District used to be more pedestrian friendly than it is now. You used to be a lot safer to ride your bike on the street where you're supposed to be riding your bike, and safer crossing streets. You'd have better visibility, you'd have better tree coverage, all these sorts of things. And I've been to beautiful cities and beautiful places in the United States and abroad, and I think we have the potential to make a very amazing city, a beautiful city that is visually stunning, is great to live in, and we have those opportunities. But right now, it feels like we're making choices that are more focused on speed, and so one of the things that I'm going to really focus on is how can we make our streets safer? How can we use our streets in a better way? And how can we make an even more beautiful Sioux Falls?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Zach.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the time.
Thank you for
Appreciate the
having me.
conversation, and good luck to you in the rest of your campaign.
Thank you very much.